Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Big lands, big animals, comparing Yellowstone and Alaska, presented by Annie Van Dinther and Drew Hamilton. Annie is NatHab's Guide Development Director, leading trips for us since 1999, and Drew has been guiding in North America with NatHab since 2014. Thanks for being with us today. Annie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kendall, and thank you to all of you who showed up today to learn about this along with us. I have had a lot of thoughts about Yellowstone and Alaska, and I've lived in Alaska since 2004. So we moved here then, and I guide here, I live here, but I've also done a lot of trips in other locations, so that comparison is interesting. I have a special guest with me today, Drew Hamilton, and I'm really grateful that you're here. Do you want to introduce yourself, Drew?
Yeah, hey everybody. Super glad to be here. I was really excited when Annie asked me to join her on this one because these webinars have been so much fun because it really is, the guides, we're one big family. We don't get to see each other that often anymore. So it's fun to digitally hang out with our guide buddies and with all of you as well. So thanks for having me, Annie.
Yeah, you bet.
I guess we'll talk a little bit about my bio.
Yeah.
So as Kendall said, I've been with NatHab since 2014. I also live in Alaska. It's kind of interesting that we've got two Alaskans doing this, but I moved back to Alaska in '99 and have been doing bear trips and all sorts of different Alaskan adventures for, shoot, you can do the math on that, 99 to whatever year it is now. And so I've done, of course, the Grizzly ship. I've done the Ultimate Alaska Safari. I've done the exploratory Kaktovik trip. I've done the Northern Lights trips in Churchill. I've done polar bear trips in Churchill. I've done Yellowstone in the fall and Yellowstone in the winter. And then I also do the monarch butterflies down in Mexico, which is where I get all my vitamin D for the entire year.
That's fantastic. It is important for us Alaskans to go south sometimes. I go to Baja. When you're guiding so often in the north or living in the north, it's a good thing. So as Alaskans, we often have this conversation about Yellowstone, basically. These two areas are compared. I have not guided in Yellowstone. I have been there though, and I went as the guide development director. So quite a few years ago now, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I went to Yellowstone in, I think it was around January, and I was there to help train guides. Now, obviously, I wasn't training them on the terrain and the, animals or that kind of thing, but just on how to be a NatHab guide. I was preparing for the trip, and I have to be honest, it was the first time that I was like, it'll be okay. But compared to Alaska, it's not going to be all that. But it was. So when we were coming up with these webinars, I thought, I want to compare them. I want to talk about this. I think other people do the same thing. Drew, do you have the same experience?
I was the same way. I've lived up here for so long, and going to Yellowstone, maybe I was a little jaded, and I was blown away by the whole experience. And this webinar, though it's kind of non-conventional, like when you're guiding in Alaska, you have conversations about Yellowstone. When you're guiding in Yellowstone, you have conversations about Alaska. Like it is kind of stemming straight from like exact conversations you have on these trips in both destinations. So it kind of worked out just perfect that we can do it in this webinar format and have the conversation with everybody.
That's right. And I want to say from the onset, the reason we've got this picture, we do know we're comparing a state to a park. I was talking to my husband about the next webinar idea, and he said, don't you have a problem there? Like not apples to apples, but it's destination to destination. And, maybe in this region or animal to animal, because there are quite a few that we have in common. So let's talk a little bit about Yellowstone. Drew, you want to share with us some information on this place?
Yeah, so, Yellowstone is, the term, just even saying the word Yellowstone conjures up very specific images in people's minds. But Yellowstone Park itself is just a small piece of the puzzle. It's about 2 million acres in what we'll call the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So the park itself is 2 million, and then the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem would be, pushing to 18 to 20. And so you're looking at a map here that shows all the other lands, public lands around the park itself that are in some sort of protected status. They don't necessarily have the same protections of a national park, but they are in conservation mode, so to speak. And so you've got Yellowstone, you've got Grand Teton, you've got all these other national forests around. You've got the National Elk Refuge, Bridger Teton National Forest. It's part of a complex, and it really is the largest intact wild space in the lower 48 states. And so, but around that, it's western states, so there's still lots of wide open spaces, but they just don't have those same protections that allow wildlife populations to flourish outside of this Greater Yellowstone ecosystem.
And they certainly do flourish. It's not just the incredible landscapes that bring people to that area. When I went, I felt like I was stepping back in time. I felt like I had suddenly gone into, some old painting or photo of what the lands used to be like when animals were really abundant. This, I understand, is not quite Yellowstone. And so this refers to what you were just talking about the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem.
Yeah, and it really, you hit on that Yellowstone, and that's what people know, but Grand Teton National Park, just to the south, that heads down towards Jackson. I always say people, they come for Yellowstone, they stay for Grand Teton, and it's an important part of that complex. And when we do trips down there, it is just as much a part of the important things we see and the important wildlife experiences we have. Like when I'm going through my favorite memories of leading those trips, there are just as many in Grand Teton as there are in Yellowstone. So though it often gets second billing, maybe it shouldn't.
Okay.
So we're looking at
let's talk a little bit about
right here. Sorry.
Yeah, that photo was of the Tetons. So let's talk a little bit about what is Yellowstone. It's a national park, and it formed in the late 1800s. It was the first national park. I think I've even read that it was the first in the world, not just in our country. It's vast landscape with varying ecosystems, and it's iconic, right? It's a place that people know about these images. Do you want to talk about this one, Drew?
Well, and just even the iconic Roosevelt Arch as you're driving into the park. It's a place people know, and it is where the concept of park or national park or these large preserved areas really took root. And so when we're talking about overlaps between Alaska and Yellowstone, yeah, Denali's been around, Denali National Park's been around a long time too, but it is based on this Yellowstone idea. And so that's another place you can draw comparisons, is the preserved lands or the park lands we have in Alaska, it's coming from this Yellowstone model.
These places that are so iconic, when you go into Yellowstone, it's just phenomenal to look at the geological features of the area. And that's what a lot of people go for, right?
Yeah, I mean, this looks like the lower geyser basin there. Like this, when we compare Alaska and Yellowstone, we don't have anything like this in Alaska. This is really the place you need to go if you're into geologic features and living dangerously by doing a tour inside a super volcano.
That's definitely a topic that my kids have talked to me quite a bit about. As we talk about the volcanoes here in Alaska, they're like, but we don't have anything like they're dealing with in Yellowstone, as they learn about that information. All of these photographs I'm showing now are this landscape, right, that people love so dearly. And of course, these features that are just incredible. Well, sometimes smelly, also incredible to see. As I traveled through Yellowstone, it was this kind of thing that just blew my mind. As Drew said, we don't have this up here. And I kind of thought, thinking about the animals, maybe that we would have pretty much the same thing. So this was one of my favorite things to see. And it was all just amazing to be there. Now this photo is actually from Yellowstone, but I did not take it. This was from Mike Hillman, our guides. And when I first saw it, I was like, is that Alaska or is that Yellowstone? And I think that's true of a lot of photographs that we're going to see here in this presentation. Which place is it from? There are a lot of things in common, especially with the animals. Let's talk about Alaska. Our state, our beautiful state, quite remote and higher latitudes, of course, than we have in the Yellowstone area. We've got quite a few bragging rights, the largest state, and our state and our population, the size of the state and the population are close to matching. So we have almost a square mile per every person who is here. Drew, you want to talk a little bit about our fine state?
Yeah, so, and I referenced some scale on the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and 20 million acres on the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And if you look at just the national parks that we have in Alaska, we're somewhere around 50 million acres. So we've got the largest national park in Wrangell St. Elias. You've got just some, not as iconic as Yellowstone, but some of the, we've got Denali, we've got Kenai Fjords National Park, we've got Katmai National Park, and if you really want to practice your social distancing, Alaska's the place to do it. There's been a popular T-shirt floating around. I've seen it around town here. Alaskan social distancing since 1959, because we do have just a lot of space. And one of the things that comes up is, you're looking at the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and it's this pocket of wilderness surrounded by, civilization. In Alaska, you've got these wilderness areas that are then surrounded by wilderness areas, just more wild spaces. And you look, this is, Brad Josephs is a good friend of ours, and this picture you're looking at is the view from Homer, where Annie and I live. And Brad Josephs used to live there, and he described it once, and this really hit home. He described Homer, Alaska as painfully beautiful. Like every time you drive over that hill and you look out, it just kind of hits you right in the gut, like, oh, wow, I live here. And I have a similar reaction when I look at the Grand Tetons. It's a very similar feel. The mountains look different. You got an ocean in Alaska, but it's that mountain, the mountains are calling, whatever you want to say, but it is. Oh, and then there's that mountain. If you've ever heard of that one, little mountain I like to call Denali. It is the largest mountain in North America, and I don't know who actually went there on such a clear day to take this image. That's fantastic. Mike Hillman.
Mike Hillman.
It, Mike.
He has the best luck in Denali. It's incredible. The trips, I gotta be honest, guys, I have guided the Alaska Ultimate Safari quite a few times, and I have not seen the mountain from the park. However, every time Mike Hillman has gone, he has seen the mountain from the park. So that's pretty incredible. When you speak about, no kidding, right? When you speak about this much beauty, when my mom asks about living in Homer, she says, so what is it like to live in a postcard today? And there's so many places in our fine state that remind us of that beauty and just kind of fulfill that need to be in these big landscapes. This is way up north, feels like almost a whole other state than where we live. And I think that's one of the big things that we have here is we are so large that there's these really different ecosystems. This is on the edge of the Arctic Ocean. We're looking at the Brooks Range, and just an incredibly beautiful place. This is Brooks Falls. Sorry, it's a little pixelated there, but another place that people just come for this iconic experience. A lot of people have seen photos from this area. We have a lot of different animals here. We get to claim the 3 bear species instead of just 1. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that of course is one of the features that we're quite proud of as Alaskans. And we also have the marine ecosystem that just isn't there in Yellowstone. It's why I knew I could live in this place. Here on the shores of Kachemak Bay, we can see whales. We can see this incredible intertidal zone. This was actually taken over in Katmai when I was on one of the bear trips. That marine ecosystem is ever present for us living here. Drew, do you want to talk about that?
Nah.
I was thinking he didn't want to. He's our terrestrial guy, the bears, right? He'll go for the water when we're talking about the polar bears being on that ecosystem. So yeah, very similar to Yellowstone in the fact that these photographs are easily taken when you are in these two places. Vast, gorgeous landscape. But the animals, that is what we want to focus on today. We want to talk about the animals that are in both places. And so, Drew, I think you want to say something at this point.
Yeah, so we wanted to do a fun little game here because we've got two cocky Alaskans who, we're talking about both places, and moose are one of the iconic species that happen in both places. And so while, Alaskan moose are generally a bit larger, they are larger subspecies. The largest moose ever recorded was out in western Alaska, and its rack across was pushing 80 inches because we've just got such good moose habitat up here. The moose in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem are a smaller subspecies, that Shiras moose, but still, when you're talking about animals this large, really, like a moose is a moose is a moose. And so we've got some different, I've assembled some different pictures of moose here. And we are going to go through and have Annie try to guess where that moose picture was taken, and we'll see how she does here. We'll see how good our Alaskan guides really are. So Annie, slide 1 here. Where is this moose?
Okay, I have to say part of this conversation came about because I think Churchill moose look really rugged, and Alaskan moose look a little more rugged. Yellowstone moose look kind of sleek, and if they've been to the barber or something like that. So I'm going to try to see if I can rely on any plants. You haven't given me a lot in that aspect. I do love botany, so I'm just going to have to guess because there's really nothing here that tells me either place. So I'm going to go for Yellowstone.
Nope. This one was taken just south of Anchorage at Potter's Marsh.
Okay,
this is the spring picture when the calves are so small and so cute. This is kind of actually the age that they are right now.
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of young moose here. We had little baby calves right in our front yard. It was so cool. We actually have a mom who gives birth quite frequently in our backyard. So sometimes we wonder if the mom we're seeing now was the mom we saw give birth a few years back. Okay. Here we've got, you just told us that Alaska has the biggest rack. And so I want to kind of think Alaska on this because of that information. But then I wonder if you're tricking me. So, but I'm going to go for Alaska.
This one is Alaska. This was taken actually about 6 miles from your house, Annie. Do you recognize this moose specifically?
Down here in town, we rarely do see these guys with the big racks. So I don't know this guy specifically, but yeah, that is very close to my house.
This is kind of halfway between your house and my house, actually.
Okay. All right. So this one, talk about those spring calves. Again, I'm trying to look at the plants here. I'm going to guess Alaska because I feel like it's the most likely place to get a photo like this.
Yes, this one is Alaska. Very good. Very good. Woo!
Okay. my deduction skills are intact there.
You should
okay.
You're in the moose forensics business here.
I know, right?
Okay. This one.
Okay. We've got spruce here. I'm really going on the plants. I didn't know that before we set this up, that was going to be my go-to plan for how to figure this out. I'm just guessing at this point, you guys. I don't know, and I don't have a lot of information, so I'm going to guess Yellowstone.
Nope. This one was taken a couple weeks ago up by Denali National Park. Moose. So this is actually a pregnant female, just like she probably gave birth within a couple days of this image being taken. This is a fresh moose picture from up near Denali.
Do you see how she looks like she had a haircut recently? Unlike us COVID folks, it's just like trimmed perfectly along the top there. Okay, I'm gonna go for Yellowstone based on what I just said about the haircut and my theory that Churchill moose are rugged, Alaska a little less, and Yellowstone are just quite beautiful and like, I don't know, somehow more neat and tidy than the others.
Well, and this is one that the vegetation does give it away. You've got some sagebrush and some bitter brush in there. So yes, ding, 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 you got that one.
Woohoo! All right. Oh. I mean, you're gonna have to help me out here. Like, there's spruce and alder in Yellowstone, right?
Not like here.
Not giving me anything, you guys. Okay, well, I'm gonna go based on the plants. No information from the moose here that would, you know, give me a thought. So I'm gonna go based on the plants and say Alaska.
Yep, Denali, another Denali. Again, just a couple weeks ago.
Nice. Okay, this photo, I'm also gonna guess Alaska, and I think it's because I'm looking at this like riverbed here that I would wonder if it's possibly in Denali.
Nope. This is out by Little America as you're heading out towards Cook City. So this is in Yellowstone National Park.
Wow, and that's just, it's incredible to me that you can go to the lower 48 and see that. Oh, this one, I'm going Alaska right away.
Oh, I gotta wait for it to advance. You know
we
what?
are in Alaska with slow internet.
I don't know where this one's from. I just found it.
Okay, we're proving our own point here. This is a photo by Mike Hillman, and I'm gonna actually wonder, because of the photo by Mike Hillman, that it's in Yellowstone, because he shared his Yellowstone photos with me. So by that logic, we'll go with that one.
I just
Here's
like this
one. This gives me absolutely no plant information, so I'm gonna go for Alaska on this, also based on the rack.
Yes, this one is up in, this is a moose in Wonder Lake. We were heading back to Kantishna with the NatHab group, and this big giant, actually this is the same moose right here. He was kind of hanging around that. So we saw him every time we were coming and going on the buses from Kantishna. So we got some really good photo ops with him. You can tell this one's a little different by the habitat. Okay, how about this one? I think we got a couple more and then we'll move on.
Yeah, then we're moving on. So this one this reminds me of home or of Alaska. Those are the two. Alaska, guys, is the place we go to on the ultimate safari, and in the winter, tons of snow. So I'm gonna guess that this is Alaska.
No, this one is in Teton Village. I actually took this one in Kurt Johnson's driveway.
Wow. And then this one, I know from the start, this is a moose from my very own garden. And I think that's one of the things about Alaska that makes us kind of feel like we're gonna not have the best experience in Yellowstone, but we're both saying we were wrong on that. So now we're gonna switch gears to bison. I think it was the vast landscape with like scattered with bison that felt like that painting. We don't really have bison in Alaska. We do. We're bringing them back. They have just in 2015, I believe, they let some go. They're wood bison brought to us from Canada. But we're trying to restore a lost population. When you move around areas here, you're not really gonna go see bison at all. There is one conservation place that you can go to see them, but they're not free roaming. That is not like the incredible bison of Yellowstone. Do you want to tell us a little bit about these guys, Drew?
Yeah, so this is that was one of the things that really got me about Yellowstone, is just being able to experience bison on that scale and have so many. They're kind of one of the running jokes as we're driving in the van through Yellowstone is, oh look, another bison, another bison. And this image is one of my favorite. This is Warm Creek as you're going out towards Cook City there, and it was this big bison that was kind of stuck in the creek and trying to make its way through. And it was one of those situations, we'd seen so many bison that day that you really have to pick your photo ops. Like we drove past it, and fortunately it was stuck in the creek. It did make it out. I pulled the group. I was like, you guys want to go back for that one? So we went up, found a turnaround, came back, and then parked, and we were just standing there along the side of the road taking this picture. And it is one of my favorites from Yellowstone. Like I feel like it's very iconic. But it's one of those things, you know, when you see something amazing in a place, and then you drive by it again and again and again, and you always expect there to be that thing in that place. And this always gets me, because every time I drive over this spot, I always look to make sure there's not a bison stuck in that creek, because it was just, oh, it was a super cool experience. Carol and John are.
I love this photo so much. And then we also have the experience of maybe being a little stuck on the road.
Right. This is definitely not something you can experience in Alaska. This is a wintertime trip in Yellowstone, and you do get these bison jams as they come and go where they please. And what are you going to do? Argue with them? I don't think so. So part of the winter trips in Yellowstone is the snow coaches and the over snow travel. And so we're in these big vehicles, and of course everybody gets a window seat, so you get lots of good views of bison. We can stop, we get out when it's safe, and take pictures. But you know, this is an iconic image, though it's taken with a cell phone. It is an iconic image from Yellowstone, because it is like, this is an authentic Yellowstone experience, staring at a bison's butt out the window.
You know, you said something about safety, and I will say, as someone who has not spent a lot of time around bison, they scare me. I'm much more nervous about moose here in Alaska than I am bears, because these ungulates, man, when they get upset, watch out, right? Do you have that same feeling when you're in Yellowstone?
I do. Like, I'm cautious around all wildlife, and you're always trying to read it, but you know, the internet is just so full of clips of tourists getting flipped by bison, or people being injured by bison. It is something you got to pay them utmost respect. And like, particularly, you know, big males like this, when you see them, you're taken aback at the size and the scale of it all.
This is the view, only it was wintertime when I went, but just this like open landscape with all of these animals on it.
Yeah, and this is a classic. You know, you're looking out over Yellowstone, and you see all these bison, but it's not just in these wild places. You'll be driving through Mammoth or someplace like that, and there'll be a bison laying in a yard or something like that.
This must be one of the most incredible things to be able to see.
You know, this is one that's on my bucket list. I still, just due to my guiding schedule, I haven't been able to make it to Yellowstone for the calving season. And I know people go specifically to look for the little red dogs, as they call them, those bison calves as they first start to drop.
I can see why they call them red dogs. Looking at that last photo that we were looking at, there's a young one in it, and you almost think it's a wolf. I love this photo. If you know the artist Bev Doolittle, this photo reminds me of her work. If you don't know her work, check it out. She's an incredible painter. This is one of your photos, Drew.
This is, and this is one of the things we talk about on these trips, is because the habitat is so impressive, and just the landscape, that trying to put an animal in a landscape is an important part. I mean, you can go to the zoo and take a picture of an animal's face, but when you're flipping through your photos at the end of a trip, the ones that are going to mean the most are going to be the ones that show the habitat, show the environment. Those of you that have gone on trip with me before, you know, I talk probably too much about photo stitching, and this is a stitched photo. So it's actually 3 photos put together so that I could get more environment in that shot. So there's one behind, there's one with the bison, and then there's one with the blurry tree in the foreground to give it some depth. So hopefully I'll get to talk to you guys more about photo stitching and things like that on a future adventure.
All right. So we're going to say goodbye to bison now, and we're going to switch gears and talk about elk. Given that we really don't have these guys up north in Alaska, I haven't had a lot of experience with them. We're going to move through them pretty quickly because we want to get to the whales and the bears. But we do need to recognize that elk are a phenomenal animal that can be seen in the Yellowstone area. Drew, you want to tell us a little bit about how we do have a few of them in Alaska?
We do have a few of them in Alaska.
There was, I think, 8. I think there were 8 of them planted in Kodiak, right? And
Well, yeah,
they were
they were brought in as a subsistence resource. You know, they were likely near military bases, and so they were brought in specifically for recreational hunting and subsistence purposes, to feed locals and to feed military members and things like that. So there are a couple isolated populations in Alaska, but it's nothing on the scale of Yellowstone. I have that previous image of the elk at Mammoth there. You know, that was on a trip. I was with Sean Eggleston, and we were all on the boardwalk. We were looking at some geologic features, and you turn around and here these elk are just laying there right in the middle. And then you start looking around Mammoth, and they're just elk everywhere. They've really adapted, and you know, elk numbers aren't once what they weren't once were in Yellowstone. They used to be overly abundant, and now they've been brought back into check, and it's a much more natural system. And then on that same itinerary, you end up going to the National Elk Refuge just outside of Jackson. Particularly on the winter trips, you can get very cool shots, like overexposed shots like this one. And we take the sleigh ride. You can see Jackson in the background there. Just it's so cool, especially coming from Alaska, where these are animals that you don't get to see, just to have them all out in front of you. And I'm like a kid in the candy store taking pictures. So,
and here we've got you taking pictures, and we're switching environment. So we're going to go to Alaska now and talk a little bit about the marine environment. And I think it's only fair, since I had to guess where the moose were, that Drew gets put on the spot as well. So we've got some photos of some whales, and we're going to mix some information about them with seeing what Drew's skills are. This is a picture of him taking a picture of a beautiful glacier. Of course, one of the things that we cherish about our home state. So what about this one, Drew?
Look like humpback whales, and I am going to guess they are in Kenai Fjords National Park.
That is a good guess. We are in Kachemak Bay looking at these whales. So parts of Kachemak Bay are in Kenai Wildlife Area or Refuge Area, but this is Kachemak Bay. These whales I saw right out here at my home, and we headed out in the boat with the kids, and we're lucky enough that we got to engage with some whales. The whales in the recent years have been coming back to this area. When I first moved here and told people that I was going to, that my experiences with whales and I wanted to guide whale trips, they were really dwindling, and we couldn't really count on seeing them. In fact, one of the kind of whale watching companies here was like, we're starting to shut down because we just don't have a lot of whales here. But some of the fisheries have been recovering, and now we can see them a little bit more here in Kachemak Bay. What about this guy, Drew?
I'm going to guess that one's in Kenai Fjords National Park.
I think Drew's going to guess that on every single one of these. This was taken in Southeast, and it was taken near, I think we call it the Baranof Island. It's where the Alaska Whale Conservation Society is. And this picture I love because it really teaches us about how we identify whales. Humpbacks are one of the easiest to know if you're looking at an individual that you've seen before or that you will see again. And it's because of this unique pattern on the back of their tail. We do a scale of 1 to 5. If it's all white, it's a 1. If it's all black, it's a 5. And then you've got all these guys in between. And it's really cool when you spend a lot of time in a certain area that you can start to recognize the individuals and know if they've had a calf or if they're they have a certain fishing style, something like that. And fishing styles is one of the things that is so incredible to see about humpback whales because they do bubble net feeding. Now, I will say every place I've gone to, Antarctica, Cape Cod, Stellwagen Bank area, and many places here in Alaska, everyone says that their whales are the only ones that. So I think there's a lot of people that like to take the credit, I guess, for understanding this and thinking that their whales started that behavior. Where do you think this guy is, Drew?
Kenai Fjords.
You're right. You got it. Hey. And that's actually what we'll do for the next two here. We've got orcas, and this is in Resurrection Bay. One of the most kind of like almost easy places. I won't say it's easy because you got to get to Alaska and you got to get out in the water, which is sometimes rough and not the easiest, but you can pretty much count on seeing whales in this area. It's highly likely that you're going to engage with humpbacks, with orcas. This is the photo that you took, Drew, of an orca. The pods there are incredible. I've got a friend who's done research with them, and you know, you've got salmon eaters, but you also have the whales that are going to feed on marine mammals. So really incredible to see humpbacks and to see orcas. They're very vocal, and one of my favorite things about these guys is if you put a hydrophone in the water, you can hear all this communication happening between the orcas, but then all of a sudden it goes silent, and you kind of like, why is that happening? It's going silent because they're hunting and they've found something that they're going to go for, and they're going to go into like stealth mode. So pretty cool. They're also a matriarchal society with the orcas, so that's pretty interesting. And yeah, I absolutely love watching them. If people do, when people can come back to Alaska, it's one of my favorite things to bring people out to see these animals. Now, I had to include a couple of pictures about the botany. I know that for a lot of people, their eyes start to kind of roll back, and you know, they're maybe not that thrilled with it. But you know, actually, when I think about it, I was the same way when I moved here. I was here for the bears, I was here for the whales, you know, that charismatic megafauna. But when I got here and started to notice the little things, I was just so impressed. And so this is wild geranium, and just, you know, all found out all throughout here, and then fireweed. And I don't think we can talk about Alaska without talking about fireweed. It sets the seasons for us. When it starts to kind of go off and you get little fluffs at the top of it, this is when you know that summer's ending. So it's actually kind of a little bit of a hard thing when you see the fireweed going. Now, we're not the only ones that enjoy the plants. The caribou, of course, do too. And these are some caribou that were sighted up in Denali. And Drew, you were just up in Denali, is that right?
Yeah, you know, it's a strange time we live in, and a lot of the travel has been restricted. But since I live up here, I was able to go up, and early season they opened the road out to the Teklanika Overlook, and so for a couple straight weeks there, we just drove up to Denali and drove into the park. We saw grizzly bears and caribou. We saw lynx. I mean, you still have to get out and kind of refresh your soul with places like this. But caribou and Denali, I kind of think of them. You know, you don't see them necessarily with the frequency you see the bison in Yellowstone, but it is kind of, when I think of the landscape around Denali and that kind of tundra, scrubby kind of stuff, it is caribou country. And there are times when you're going through and these herds move far and wide, because we talked about how much habitat there is for them up here in Alaska, just because we are so big. They still like the roads though, path of least resistance, right? But it's an iconic species, and if you catch a herd of caribou moving through, it really harkens back to days of old. It's got a very kind of primeval feeling. And so these caribou, you know, right now their antlers are starting to grow. They are the only member of the deer species in North America that have both male and female with antlers. Do I say it? Do I steal Rhonda's joke?
Yeah, say it. Okay. It's so good.
So this is from Rhonda in Churchill. So if you know Rhonda, sorry Rhonda, I'm ripping off your stuff here, but you know, it is reindeer and caribou are very similar. And you know, the caribou will shed their antlers, or the males will shed their antlers after the rut in the fall. The females will keep their antlers through the winter. And so when it comes right down to it, around Christmas time, the females are the only ones that technically should have antlers at that point. So it does mean that all of Santa's reindeer, Rudolph, Blitzen, Donner, they're all females.
I love that. I never get tired of it, even though I've heard it a bunch of times. You know, caribou, I agree. You see them all over the landscape. Their numbers have been dwindling, partly because of climate change and partly for reasons that we don't know. But when you do get to see them in Denali, you know, we talk a lot in that park about adapt migrate or die? Like, how do you survive the harsh winters of Denali? And there's one animal that actually does it by living in the nose of the caribou. The botfly will lay its eggs there, hunker down, and that's how it survives the cold winter months. And I never get tired of learning about that one too, even though it's kind of a gross topic. But it's amazing that that's how that animal makes it through the winter. Super fascinating. So now we're going to switch gears to something that the caribou probably don't like all that much, because they are something that feeds on them. I have a little bit of experience with wolves. You know, as I said, I don't guide in Yellowstone, but I have had the pleasure of seeing them along the Katmai coast when I've gone for bear viewing there. But you, Drew, guiding in Yellowstone, have a lot more experience with the wolves.
Well, and so wolves are a species that we do have in both places. They've always been here in Alaska, but they were reintroduced in Yellowstone. And, you know, one of the questions that always comes up is, I want to see wolves. Do I go to Yellowstone or do I go to Alaska? And so there are some differences in how we watch wolves in both places. I would say that the wolf sightings are much more consistent in Yellowstone. Like, you can really build a trip around looking for wolves. And oftentimes you're watching them, well, oftentimes they're watching you. But you're watching them through scopes, like you'll see here in the next one. So you are watching them at a distance, but watching these wolves move at a landscape scale is epic. It makes, like, when you talk about how the systems work in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, seeing them move through the landscape like that really clues you into how things work. Like, I've had some amazing wolf experiences in Yellowstone where I watched them try to take down a bison calf. We had, you know, one trip, this one's a coyote. Alert, alert, an imposter. Reminds me of we had a you know, everybody's driving up and down the road there in Lamar, and we had somebody pull over and say, oh, we just saw 5 wolves. And then we go up a little ways and there were these coyotes sitting there. So they can be very tricky to tell apart if you don't have the proper experience to know. But comparing with the Katmai wolves, we don't see them with the same frequency. We don't see them on every trip. But when you do, you have a tendency to see them closer up, perhaps. And so you'll see them fishing right alongside the bears. I had one experience. We were out on the Grizzly ship with one of the groups. We're the only ones out in Geographic Harbor. We're sitting there with a misty morning. There were no bears. We were just waiting for them. And here comes this wolf tracking along the wall over, and it got straight downwind from us. And then it turned and came right towards us, straight at us. It went, we measured afterwards, it went 15 feet off one end of the group, and then it picked up a fish, and then it came 15 feet, it went back 15 feet off the other side of us, and then laid down maybe 20 yards out and ate the salmon right in front of us. Like, those are the kind of experiences, but you can't bank on stuff like that. So you have to decide whether you want to roll the dice and get them up close, or if you want to watch them on that landscape scale. And both situations have their charms.
I remember watching the wolves in Yellowstone when I did that guide training trip. And while we sometimes think seeing something through a scope, it's at a great distance. And of course, close-up wildlife like you just described is so special. But again, it's that, like, seeing how that ecosystem works and seeing a pack move, rather than just zoning in on this one animal. And I think that was one of the things that was most special for me about Yellowstone. Here in Katmai, we can actually see bears and wolves together, which is quite special. But as Drew just said, I have been to the Katmai coast probably, gosh, a lot of times, upwards maybe close to 10 times. And I have only seen wolves one time that I've been there. So it is not something that we can necessarily plan on, but it's incredibly special when it happens. We're gonna switch gears here from the wolves to the bears, because, you know, that's our favorite. I have to say, we get to have all 3 species of bears here in Alaska. So someone could conceivably come to our state and maybe head down to Annan Creek and take in some black bear viewing, and then come up to Katmai and really enjoy the brown bear viewing, and then go up to Kaktovik and see some polar bears. We'll talk a little bit more about Kaktovik and the problems with just jumping on up there. But black bears are so abundant in Alaska, and they're really incredible to watch. Drew, I think you've spent quite a bit of time with them.
Yeah, so over the years doing these trips, you know, black bears are not necessarily the star of the show like grizzly bears or polar bears, but they do turn up in some surprising places. I remember one time we were on an Ultimate Alaska safari and we were sitting outside the hotel in Girdwood getting ready to go rafting or move on to our next destination. And so we're sitting on the magic bus and just waiting. And while we're sitting there, a black bear wanders out of the woods and wanders up to the Alyeska Hotel, which of course has the sliding doors. And so the doors open, and then all of a sudden the security guards come rushing out and chase this black bear back into the woods. Apparently this bear had figured this out before. This was not they're on bear alert. And the sliding doors made it intriguing to go inside and check out all the smells. So they're around. Their numbers are measured in the hundreds of thousands here in Alaska. So they turn up in some really interesting places.
I was just out in the Kenai Wildlife Refuge a couple days ago. It's my son's birthday, and so we went out morel hunting. And the whole time, of course, anytime you set foot in the wilderness in Alaska, you need to be bear aware. And we went through the whole talk as one would. And then we got down Skilak Road. If anyone wants to look up where that is, it's in the Kenai Wilderness Refuge area. And we were checking to see for mushrooms, and we went to a couple different burnout spots the mushrooms grow where there's been wildfire. And my son said at this one last stop, Mom, I'm not going down there alone. There's bears around. And we've been in bear country for hours, but at that point he was like, something kind of gave him the clue. Sure enough, we drove about 5 seconds up the road and we see this beautiful little cub right there in the ditch. The best feeding was probably right there in the ditch because the burnout, has taken away a lot of that, like the fresh greens and that kind of. So this little cub was just hanging out on the side of the road. We got to watch it for a long time, and I was struck by its size. First of all, I have spent more time watching grizzlies and polar bears, and it was really small. And we never did see its mom. So I'm always going to be curious what's going on with that bear. In fact, I might head up this weekend and see if I can get another look at it. Not likely, not really how it works with black bear viewing, but it might be worth a try. They're not just in Alaska. They're also in Yellowstone, but in a very different kind of way. There's a lot less black bears in the Yellowstone area, more like 500 to 600. I gotta say though, when we talk about those numbers, Drew and I are kind of both in the same camp here. How do you know that there's hundreds of thousands of bears, in Alaska? How do you count an animal like that?
I think a lot of that, you do surveys and things like that, but a lot of it comes from habitat modeling, where you look at the areas where they should be and you can identify the habitat types and say, oh, this area would support this many, this area would support this many, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it is counting bears is very difficult because one, they move around a lot, and two, sometimes they're in tricky spots to see. If you've ever been out on the Katmai coast with us, they are kind of in your face, but then you start to look around and you realize just how many there are. You're like, oh, there's one over there. Oh, there's one over there. And it should be pointed out that, sometimes they can be hard to tell apart from black bears. This little one right here, eating looks like choke cherries, was on Moose Wilson Road in Grand Teton National Park. And we got to watch this bear relatively close up because we have those vehicles we've got in Yellowstone with the hatches that pop the top. And so we just parked in this parking area and had people go out the top so we could watch, and the bear was down in front of us and it went off over the hill. It was really, really quite fun. But yeah, just look at that little guy. He's adorable, but he is a black bear, but black bears do occur in a bunch of different color phases. They can be black. They can be kind of almost a bluish color. They can be cinnamon. They can be white. The spirit bears are white black bears. Now, usually this is kind of an interesting picture I took in random spot here in Alaska, but it was an area where the subadult or young brown bears and the adult black bears tolerated each other and would share space and time while fishing. It's just kind of an overlap spot over on the west side of Cook Inlet there.
Wow, that's very cool. I got to see the same thing in Annie Creek, right, where we've got black bears and brown bears in the same area together, which of course is really special. Now, brown bears can be seen in all kinds of places in Alaska. And we should say, when we say brown bears, people also talk about grizzly bears, and they're the same species. But here in Alaska, if they're on the coast, we talk about brown bears. And then sometimes I find when we're in Denali, we talk about grizzlies. And this is in Denali National Park. Saw these bears right off the road as we were traveling through. And it's definitely a very different thing to watch a bear in that habitat than in on the coast. I feel differently even about moving on land with them. I wouldn't want to sit just a few feet from this bear like we do in Katmai. This is a bear that was photographed in the Katmai Coast. Our good friend Brad Josephs. You want to talk a little bit about this, Drew?
Yeah, one of the questions we always get is, what's the best time to go on the grizzly ship? And it boils down to what you want to see. You know, Brad's been doing these early season trips for a long time now, and so he's got a lot of these super cute cubs and things like that you can see on his Instagram feed or his Facebook page. Or actually, Brad Josephs now has a TikTok. So if we have any of the 400 plus people watching this, if you have a TikTok, go look up Brad Josephs on TikTok, because it's really entertaining.
I can't believe that. My kids are trying to talk me into getting one, and I'm still like trying to figure out Instagram. So I'm a little bit behind the ball on that social media thing. Getting to see bears in Katmai is I love this picture because it really shows what the experience is like, where you're just kind of set up and the bears are working the river right in front of you. Which location is this, Drew?
So this is in Kinnack Bay, just south of Hallow. So this is right on the coast, and it really gives an example of the difference between brown bears and grizzly bears. And it's geographic. You know, if they have salmon, they're brown bears. If they don't, they're grizzly bears. But it often gets described as grizzly bears are more aggressive, but I don't think of it that way. I think of them as less tolerant of humans. It takes a lot more habitat to make a grizzly bear, and so they're used to fighting off other bears or just dealing with a harsher reality. Whereas the brown bears, you know, lunch swims right to them, and they're a bit more mellow in their demeanor. So you can do things around brown bears that you definitely wouldn't try with a Yellowstone grizzly bear or Denali grizzly bear, because it's safe and it's disrespectful to the animals. But this was a fun memory here. We were out there with Graham and Jenny and Richard and John and the crew. That was a fun day. Oh, and then there's also, of course, the iconic Tom Mengelson images of, you know, Brooks Falls is the only place where you can get the salmon leaping into the bear's mouth. I don't know if the salmon think of it like that, but yeah. So one of the things we do on the Ultimate Alaska Safari is we go to Brooks and try to get this shot, and it's tricky, it's tough, but we figured out some tricks we'll share with you when you're here.
You got this shot, right? This is your photograph, and you do have to put your time in. Yeah, I bet you do. I don't, even though I've been there, but I'm not the photographer that Drew is, and I've gotten close. I love the photos. Actually, I spend a lot of time in that area while other people are busy trying to get this shot. I'm obsessed with the cubs, and I'm usually at a lower platform trying to get some shots of the mothers and cubs, because I fall for them every time. But there are bears in Yellowstone. We don't get to claim that we are the only place with these brown bears. Where was this one taken?
Well, so this bear has been in the news a lot lately. This is grizzly bear 399 with her last set of cubs when Sean Eggleston and I were doing a trip. We were actually in Cook City, way up in the other corner of the park, and we got word that she was down by the Jackson Lake Dam. And so we pulled the group and we said, hey folks, if we want to see this iconic grizzly bear, we need to modify this itinerary, because we reserve the right to change the itinerary based on safety and finding cool stuff. So we did this mad dash through the park. I had everybody close their eyes when we were passing interesting things. I said, don't look out the window. And we got down there and we were at the Jackson Lake Dam, and people had been camped out there for 10 hours waiting for her to come out of the trees. And they hadn't quite seen her yet. They knew she was in there. And we roll up, and Sean's got the people, and he came up, and I was parking the vehicle. I came back, and then about 10 minutes after we got there, she got up with her 2 cubs and took them across the river, and the snow was starting to fall, and it was amazing. And so on our drive out, we're in this bear jam, so you're sitting in traffic, and I was going on about how amazing that was, and we're never going to have another experience like that as long as we shall live. And then I'll be danged if she didn't walk out of the trees and walk right up to our vehicle, to the point where I couldn't see her out the passenger window, and the person who was sitting shotgun is trying to shoot down like this. Now Sean knows his bears, and so he could see that she was trying to get across the road, and so he parked a little back from us. And so here you got the 2 NatHab vehicles with this gap in between, and that's the gap she was looking for, because she knew that she wanted to get across the road, and she walked right between our 2 vehicles, and we got pictures of her and the vehicles. And then, you know, our minds are all blown, and she walks off, and I turn around and I look out the drive window, and there's Tom Mengelson trying to look over our van. So he's going, oh, what's going on over there? I was like, hey, Tom, you've seen her before.
That's fantastic.
Good times.
So, Drew, I'm looking at the clock here, and you know, as you and I were preparing this talk, we were worried we weren't going to have enough to say. But
I know we started telling
clearly
stories.
That's not the
Okay,
case.
we'll here's some good ones, and we got a couple more stories to tell. So we'll flip through until we see something interesting and want to talk about it.
Okay, sounds good. So that's around Brooks Falls. Do you want to tell us this story?
Oh, so man, this was on the Seasons of Solitude trip that I got to do with Justin Gibson last year. And Simon, if he's an adventure specialist, if you call up and ask for Simon, he'll tell you this story too. But we were right at the trailhead going to the falls, and we were waiting. And you know, you suddenly, I don't know which bear this is, it might be 68, come walking out of the woods. And so we all go running back, walking with purpose, walk with purpose back to the outhouse. So we're hiding around the outhouse as this bear came through. But these are the things that just, you know, they spice up a trip. They keep you on your toes.
That's for sure. That's a trail that I've taken so many times. And yeah, you always know they're close, but right on the trail, they're going to want the easiest way to get there too, right? Now, the bear we get to claim, the Yellowstone, does not have these polar bears. These are 2 cubs up in Kaktovik. Drew and I have both been up to that area. And it's quite different from viewing bears in Churchill, but there's a good reason that we go to Churchill instead of Kaktovik. Drew, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we did an experimental trip up there a few years ago, and it was a ton of fun, and it was filled with adventure. We might have had some weather delays and got a little stuck and this and that, but we had great bear viewing. So we're just waiting. It's still on our radar to go back up there, but we're just waiting for the logistics to calm down a little bit before we start doing it on the regular.
It's pretty common for folks to get stuck in Kaktovik for like a few days because of weather, and that's common. Like we've had storms delay us in Churchill, but not like that. And certainly not over and over and over again kind of thing. But it is a great place to go see bears, and certainly us proud Alaskans. So we finished on this this picture of this grizzly bear. I told Drew that I needed some more fireweed if we were going to talk about Alaska. So he put this photo in. This is a bear in fireweed. Do you want to tell us about this?
Oh, this was just one of those magic moments where everything comes together. We've been watching this mom. She actually has she's got 3 cubs with her that aren't tall enough to make it over the fireweed. So they're hiding down below there, and she was, you know, looking for a spot to nurse. And so, you know, it's just these special moments that you have to be somewhere. You have to be in Yellowstone. You have to be in, this was in Katmai. And like the more you get out there and experience these places, these opportunities pop up. You know, they don't always happen on every trip. You can't bank on them, but that's part of the unknown is what you keep what keeps you coming back for more. And so I know it's a hard time. Travel is very restricted right now, but it's one of these things where, you know, we're trying to share these stories with you, get you fired up for when we can travel again. And it's also an important conservation message. There's a lot that's going on right now in the world. You know, if you know me, you know I'm very active in the pebble mine fight. With the help of Natural Habitat, we've been mounting a campaign to stop the pebble mine, but that's something that's being pushed through under our noses while this pandemic is going on. And so, like, it's a situation where we have to see it or save it now so that we can see it later. So thank you for everybody who's been lending your support to the No Pebble Mine fight. And you can follow me on Instagram, DrewHH, and you know, that's a good place to get the most regular updates. And we're going to be launching a new website and some webisodes from the field, taking people out to see bears virtually. And a big thanks to Natural Habitat Adventures in that they have carbon offset our conservation projects. You know, a lot of these documentaries and things like that, you know, we have to start looking at our carbon footprint, even on conservation. You can't save something by putting a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere. So big thank you to and everybody at Natural Habitat for the carbon offsets that they do.
It is one of the reasons we're incredibly proud of the company that we get to work with. And so with that, we are going to turn it over to you, Kendall, and see if we've got any questions in the audience.
Yeah, we do have some questions. And Drew, just a quick note, someone watching today commented that they just got their No Pebble Mine shirts in the mail. So they're very excited about that.
Excellent. It is the epitome of conservation fashion. So wear it with pride and start some conversations about it. Let people know what's going on. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah. And before we start the Q&A, I just want to remind folks that if they have questions for Annie and Drew, you can submit them via the questions field in your control panel. Okay, I know it's the top of the hour, so we'll get to as many as we can in the next 5-10 minutes. Okay, first question for you. There's a couple different questions actually about comparisons. So the first one is, how can you tell a wolf versus a coyote?
I'm going to leave that to Drew.
The vibe. I don't know. When you get practiced at looking at them, there's wolves are a lot bigger. Wolves can be significantly larger than coyotes, and so where that gets tricky is when you don't have something else for scale. Like if you're just looking at them in a field, it can be very, very difficult to tell them apart. The ears are different, the face is a little different, the body shape, the tail, the way it hangs is different, and then color. So when you're in Yellowstone and somebody says, "Oh, there's a wolf up there," and you're trying to qualify their answer, the first question you ask is, "What color was it?" And if it's black, it's a wolf, right? So that's then you have to see it, and you know, your professional guides, of course, will be able to tell you the difference.
My experience watching coyotes is in towns. So I would say, you know, if you are in a city or a town and you see one of these animals, it's a coyote. But I would go that way as far as location goes. We see coyotes down here in Homer every once in a while, and you know, the first thought, we just saw a wolf, and then it's like, oh, we're pretty close to town right now. It's probably not what we saw. And you usually see them, they're kind of fleeting, right? It's not like you get to hang out with them like you got to in Yellowstone and in Katmai.
Well, I did see a wolf up by my house a couple winters ago. It was definitely so we do have wolves around Homer too. They're just a little harder to see.
And that's key there, because I live right in town in Homer, and Drew lives kind of outside of town, so much more likely to see some of that wildlife. What do we have next, Kendall?
Next comparison. Earlier you mentioned that caribou and reindeer are pretty similar, but are there any differences?
Well, reindeer can fly, of course, is the most obvious. It becomes readily apparent at liftoff which one they are. No, basically, a reindeer is a domesticated caribou. There are some genetic differences that have come with human selection over time. You'll see them in slightly different environments. I think of like there have been large reindeer herding projects here in Alaska to try and get, subsistence resources for people in villages and things like that. And, basically they're caribou that they got and have basically domesticated them. So there are some slight differences, but there's nothing so huge that you're going to be like, oh, that's one versus the other.
When I was in Spitsbergen, I was able to see some caribou there, and they refer to them as reindeer, even though they're not domesticated. And I was struck by the difference in the caribou that we see here in Alaska and there. Again, they call them reindeer, but it's same that Drew is saying, there's not huge biological differences. They're shorter in Spitsbergen, I'll tell you that much. Yeah. Next question, Kendall.
Okay, I've got 3 rapid fire Yellowstone questions for you. How fast can bison move?
Fast. I don't know miles per hour, but I mean, they are shockingly fast and they're shockingly agile. I mean, jumping over an 8-foot fence, they're probably going to be going 30, 40 miles an hour. Like they can move very fast for such a large animal. But yeah, I don't know the miles per hour off the top of my head, but it's always faster than you expect.
Okay, and when is for bison? When is calving season in Yellowstone?
It's in the spring. It was just kind of going on. I was seeing a lot of Instagram pics of the babies that have been circulating. So it's it's just happened. What year is it?
Okay.
What month is this? I've lost so much track of time.
And last rapid fire question, are the elk in Yellowstone Roosevelt elk?
Rocky Mountain.
Okay. One more Yellowstone question. How is the relationship with ranchers re the wolves?
That's a tricky question because in order to come up with one answer, you have to paint ranchers with a broad brush. That is not necessarily the most accurate way to do it. It is traditionally been a source of conflict. Wolves and ranchers don't get along, but that being said, that's not all ranchers. There are ranchers out there who appreciate wolves for their wilderness value and what they provide for the landscape in terms of ecological services, and just like the Western culture, living in this wild place. And so while traditionally, yes, it was a source of conflict, I don't want to, like I said, paint everybody with that brush. It is, I think there have been great strides made in increasing understanding of the wolves, particularly since they've been reintroduced and people have said, oh, maybe they're not as bad as they've been made out to be over the last few centuries of American history.
Okay, and I'm going to combine a few questions about Alaska and wildlife viewing into one. When is the best time to go to Alaska to see wildlife, particularly early summer or later?
It depends what you want to see. It really does. Like I started to go into it and we were short on time, but I was trying to make the grizzly ship, and you can kind of draw this out too, but like if you want to see the super cute cubs, like you go on the early season trips. But the bears aren't fishing at that point. They're grazing on sedge. And so like if you wanted to see them fishing, you would go in the late season. And I know Brad really likes those early season trips. You've got a lot of daylight, a lot of good, particularly if you're a photographer, a lot of great light in the spring. You just got to stay up late to get it. I'm a big fan of the late season trips. When I do the grizzly ship, I always put in my schedule request to do the last trip of the year because I like watching them fish. And then that time of year, the bears have their coats back, they're fat, they look like bears should look. And so it really comes down to what you want to see because they are different. So it's not like you just come and say, oh, we see bears, but what do you want to see the bears do? So spring is grazing. It's maybe there are a lot of epic fights in the springtime if you're somebody that enjoys that sort of thing. Again, you can see lots of great bear fights on Brad Joseph's TikTok, set to music. It's kind of fun. But yeah, you'll have to make that decision for yourself, but it just depends what you want to see.
I'll say relative to the other wildlife, in addition to bears, whales are going to be here throughout the spring and the summer. And, you know, as far as like the fall colors in Denali, something that I think is kind of an incredible thing to see. We think of the fall foliage being, you know, these tall trees and shedding their leaves, but there's also a lot of color in Denali on that kind of tundra carpet. So I agree with Drew, there's good reasons to go to both places or whatever time.
Oh, and that
right.
seasonal solitude trip is epic.
Great. I'm gonna go ahead and call it there with the questions, but one final last comment for you, Drew. There's someone watching from Sydney, Australia wearing their No Pebble Mine shirt. So you've gone worldwide.
We're going global. Thank you so much for wearing that in Australia. Like it's really warmed my heart to see everybody who cares and the lengths that people are going to lend their support. And sending one of those sweatshirts to Australia, like that's fantastic.
All right, well, I'd like to throw it back to you guys for some closing comments today. So we'll start with Drew.
Well, I'm super stoked that I got to do this with my friend Annie. It is a little bit of contact with the outside world so we can all expand our horizons and things like that. And it's one of my favorite subjects. Like I said, this is one of the conversation that comes up on every single Yellowstone trip or every single Alaska trip. And so hopefully this has helped you make some decisions in your wildlife priorities and what you want to see. And when we can start traveling again, you'll have a clearer picture of what you want to do.
And Annie?
All right. And thank you so much for joining me in this. It's something, as I said, before I went to Yellowstone, I didn't think I'd be that impressed. And I was very happy to hear when I discussed this with Drew that he felt the same way. But of course, we got there and we're blown away. So I really appreciate the chance to just kind of talk about this and flesh it out a little bit. So thank you for that. And thank you especially to all of you who joined us. We couldn't do this without you, and it does give us a way to sort of travel even when we're at home. So we really appreciate you tuning in, and yeah, hopefully we helped explain these places and these animals to you a little bit today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Annie and Drew, for presenting today. This was absolutely wonderful, and I want to thank everyone watching today as well. And be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, and we'll get that replay out to you soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.